The sun broke over the eastern ridge of the desert basin, casting long shadows across the scrubland that stretched toward the horizon. Dawn in this remote corner of the southwestern desert carried a peculiar stillness, a moment when the night creatures retreated and the day's inhabitants had yet to emerge. The temperature hovered at a comfortable 65 degrees, but within hours it would climb well above 90, baking the rocky terrain into a shimmering haze of heat. The ranger stood on the wooden porch of the modest observation station, coffee mug in hand, surveying the territory that had been under his care for the past 15 years. At 47, his face bore the weathered lines of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, skin-tanned and leathery from countless patrols under the merciless desert sun, crow's feet etching outward from eyes accustomed to squinting across vast distances. He took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. The morning ritual had become sacred to him, these quiet moments before the day's duties began. The observation station, perched on an elevated plateau overlooking miles of protected wilderness, served as both workplace and sanctuary. After his divorce 12 years ago, he had retreated further into his work, finding solace in the desert's harsh but honest landscape. His daughter, now in college studying environmental science, visited during holidays, their relationship strengthened by shared respect for the natural world he had dedicated his life to protecting. The ranger's reputation among colleagues was impeccable. After nearly 2 decades with the Park Service, he had earned the quiet respect afforded to those who demonstrated competence without seeking recognition. Search and rescue teams often requested him specifically when hikers went missing, valuing his encyclopedic knowledge of the region's hidden canyons, seasonal water sources, and treacherous terrain. Even the most experienced local guides deferred to his judgment regarding trail conditions and wildlife patterns. He set his mug down on the wooden railing and inhaled deeply, drawing in the scent of creosote and sage that perfumed the morning air. Something felt different today. The ranger couldn't place it exactly, but decades in the wilderness had honed his senses to detect subtle shifts in the natural order. He glanced toward the bird feeder hanging from the porch overhang, empty, despite having been filled the previous evening. The desert thrashers and cactus wrens that typically competed for seeds were nowhere to be seen. Walking to the edge of the porch, he surveyed the landscape with greater attention. The chorus of morning birdsong was noticeably subdued. Even the ubiquitous desert cottontails, which normally grazed near the station during these early hours, were absent. He checked the weather station readout mounted beside the door. Barometric pressure falling, humidity unusually high for this time of year. Not storm weather, precisely, but something unsettled. His radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. "Base to Ranger Outpost 7, come in." He reached for the device clipped to his belt. "Outpost 7 receiving, go ahead. Morning check-in. Any issues to report?" The ranger hesitated, considering mentioning the unusual quiet, the missing wildlife, but decided against it. These observations, while noteworthy to him, would sound trivial over the radio. "All clear at Outpost 7. Beginning East Quadrant Patrol at 0700. Copy that. Next check-in at 1200. Base out." The ranger returned the radio to his belt and went inside the station to prepare for his patrol. The interior was Spartan but functional. A single room with a desk bearing maps and monitoring equipment, a small kitchenette, a cot for overnight stays during fire season, and storage lockers containing various gear. He gathered his day pack, checking its contents methodically. First aid kit, 2-liter water reservoir, high-protein snacks, multi-tool, GPS unit, compact binoculars, field notebook, and digital camera. The East Quadrant patrol route would take him through some of the most remote sections of the protected area, a 12-mile loop across rugged terrain where tourist trails didn't reach. This far into the wilderness, the landscape preserved its primeval character, largely untouched by human intervention. The ranger preferred these solitary patrols, away from the visitor centers and designated campgrounds. Here, the desert revealed itself honestly, its beauty and brutality coexisting without compromise. As he locked the station and descended the wooden steps to his service vehicle, a white SUV bearing the Park Service insignia, the ranger noticed a cluster of ravens circling approximately 3 miles east. Ravens were common enough in the desert, but their behavior often signaled something worth investigating, perhaps a wounded animal or unexpected water source. He made a mental note to adjust his route accordingly. The ranger started the vehicle, its engine breaking the morning quiet. The dashboard clock read 6:43 a.m. He would be right on schedule. The patrol vehicle handled the uneven terrain with practiced ease as he navigated away from the outpost and onto the network of service roads that crisscrossed the protected area. The suspension groaned occasionally over particularly rough patches, but the ranger barely noticed, his mind already shifting into the observational state that characterized his workdays, alert to anomalies, changes, or signs of trouble. For the first hour of his patrol, everything proceeded as expected. He stopped twice to photograph and log unusual erosion patterns for the geology team's ongoing study, and once to remove a tumbleweed that had become entangled in a wildlife drinking station. The morning heat intensified as predicted, and by 8:30 he had removed his light jacket, continuing in his uniform shirt with the sleeves rolled up. It was approaching 9:15 when the ranger crested a rise and spotted something that immediately registered as out of place, a glint of metal where no metal should be, approximately half a mile off the service road in a shallow ravine seldom visited even by the most adventurous hikers. He slowed the vehicle, reaching for his binoculars. Through the lenses, he could make out what appeared to be a vehicle partially obscured by a stand of mesquite and palo verde trees that lined the seasonal wash. The location made no sense. There were no roads, official or otherwise, leading to or from the spot. Whatever vehicle it was, it hadn't driven there through any conventional means. The ranger frowned, lowering the binoculars. The circling ravens he had noticed earlier now seemed to be concentrated above this very location. His pulse quickened slightly as he considered the possibilities. Smugglers occasionally attempted to use the remote sections of the desert for their operations, though this area was particularly inhospitable for such activities. Perhaps it was an abandoned vehicle, though how it came to be in such an inaccessible location remained puzzling. As a ranger with jurisdictional responsibility, he was obligated to investigate. He marked his position on the GPS, radioed in a brief status update without mentioning the anomaly, standard procedure for leaving the patrol route, and turned the vehicle toward the distant ravine. The ranger parked his vehicle at the closest accessible point to the ravine and proceeded on foot. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as he descended into the wash, loose shale giving way beneath his boots, forcing him to choose each step with care. Heat radiated from the rocky ground, the temperature now well into the 90s. Sweat beaded on his forehead and dampened his uniform shirt as he navigated around spiny cholla and barrel cacti that dotted the slope. As he drew closer, the ranger could now clearly identify the object, a government-issue SUV similar to his own patrol vehicle, but lacking any specific agency markings. The vehicle was positioned at an awkward angle, its front end slightly lower than the rear, as if it had been deliberately maneuvered to be less visible from above. There were no tire tracks leading to or from the vehicle, which struck the ranger as profoundly unusual. Even in this rocky terrain, tires would leave some trace. It was as if the vehicle had been placed there rather than driven. The ravens he had observed earlier now perched on nearby rock formations, their occasional harsh calls the only sound breaking the desert silence. The ranger paused, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of human presence. Finding none, he approached the vehicle with measured caution, his hand instinctively moving to rest near his sidearm, a precaution drilled into him through years of training. At 20 yards distance, he noted the vehicle's windows were tinted dark, preventing any view of the interior. The license plate had been removed, though the rectangular indentation and screw holes in the bumper clearly indicated its recent presence. No identifying numbers were visible on the vehicle's exterior, another anomaly, as government vehicles typically displayed fleet identification codes. The ranger circled the SUV slowly, maintaining a safe distance while cataloging details. The vehicle appeared relatively new, with minimal dust accumulation considering the environment. The tires showed little wear. There was no visible damage to the exterior that might suggest an accident or forced abandonment. This had been a deliberate placement. He checked his radio signal. 3 bars, sufficient for emergency contact if needed. Unclipping his camera, he took several photographs from different angles, documenting the vehicle and its unusual location. Standard procedure, but also personal insurance against whatever might follow. 15 years of service had taught him that thorough documentation protected not only the evidence but also the investigator. The ranger approached the driver's side door, noting that it was not fully closed, another peculiarity that triggered his professional alarm sensors. Using his pen, he carefully pulled the door handle, stepping back quickly as the door swung open several inches before stopping. No alarm sounded, no interior light activated. He waited 30 seconds, listening before approaching again. Using his tactical flashlight, he illuminated the interior through the partially open door. The beam revealed a standard government vehicle setup: cloth seats, basic console, radio equipment. Nothing immediately unusual, except for the keys still hanging in the ignition and what appeared to be a leather briefcase on the passenger seat. Taking a deep breath, the ranger pulled the door fully open and immediately recoiled at the smell that escaped, a sickly sweet odor underlaid with something chemical that burned his nostrils. Years of experience had familiarized him with the scent of death in various forms, but this was different, artificial, processed somehow. He covered his nose and mouth with his bandana and leaned in further, directing his flashlight across the vehicle's interior. What he saw caused his body to react before his mind could process the information. His heart rate spiked, his breath caught, and a cold sweat erupted across his skin despite the desert heat. In the back seat, partially covered by what appeared to be a military-style tarp, lay a human form, or what had once been human. The body, the ranger couldn't determine gender due to the condition, appeared desiccated, as if rapidly mummified, the skin drawn tight across facial features in a grotesque mask. But it wasn't the state of decomposition that caused the ranger to freeze in horror. It was the color. The visible skin was mottled with an unnatural bluish-purple hue that no human decomposition could explain. More disturbing still were the patterns across the exposed forearms and neck, geometric, almost crystalline structures that appeared to have formed within or beneath the skin, creating raised ridges that followed no natural anatomical pattern. The ranger's training fought against his instinct to retreat. He forced himself to catalog details with clinical detachment. The body wore what remained of a dark suit, standard government issue. No identification was visible. The hands, curled into rigid claws, bore the same crystalline patterning as the exposed neck and face. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no blood, no wounds, just the inexplicable transformation of human tissue into something the ranger had no context to understand. In his 15 years of service, he had encountered death in many forms. Hikers succumbed to exposure, drownings in flash floods, even the occasional suicide or accidental fall. He had assisted in recovering bodies weeks old in summer heat. None had presented like this. The ranger backed away from the vehicle, careful to touch nothing, and gulped clean air. His mind raced through protocols for discovered human remains, but nothing in the procedural manual covered this scenario. The unnatural condition of the body, the unmarked government vehicle in a location impossible to reach by conventional driving, the absence of tracks, every element suggested something beyond standard jurisdiction. He took several more photographs, being careful to document the condition of the body while maintaining distance. Then, steeling himself, he approached the vehicle once more, this time focusing on the briefcase on the passenger seat. Using his pen again, he nudged it slightly to reveal a combination lock and what appeared to be a biometric scanner built into the case itself, technology far more advanced than standard government issue. Attached to the handle was a small metal tag bearing an unfamiliar insignia and a series of numbers and letters that corresponded to no agency classification system he recognized. The ranger's mind flashed back to his military service before joining the Park Service. 2 years in Army intelligence that had exposed him to various security classifications and interagency operations. Even with that background, he couldn't place the insignia or coding system. He carefully closed the vehicle door using his bandana to avoid leaving fingerprints, then retreated to a boulder 30 yards away. Sitting down, he reviewed the photographs on his camera display, confirming they had captured the essential details. Then he pulled out his field notebook and wrote a comprehensive description of everything he had observed, including his estimated time of discovery, environmental conditions, and precise GPS coordinates. The ranger checked his watch, 10:47 a.m. His scheduled radio check-in was at noon. He had just over an hour to decide how to proceed. The ranger returned to his patrol vehicle and retrieved his investigation kit, a waterproof case containing evidence collection materials, additional photographic equipment, and protective gear. Standard procedure for discovering potential crime scenes in remote locations required securing the area and waiting for backup. But something about this scenario suggested that following standard procedure might not be in anyone's best interest, including his own. He donned nitrile gloves and a respiratory mask from his kit, then returned to the mysterious vehicle. The ravens had multiplied, now numbering perhaps 20, their agitated calls creating an eerie chorus that echoed through the ravine. They showed unusual interest in the vehicle despite the sealed windows and doors. Another detail that raised the ranger's professional concern. With proper protection in place, he approached the vehicle more methodically this time. Using his multi-tool, he carefully opened the rear hatch, standing aside as it lifted to avoid direct exposure to the interior. The cargo area contained 3 metal cases, secured with similar biometric locks as the briefcase he had observed earlier. Unlike the passenger compartment, this area smelled strongly of antiseptic, hospital-grade disinfectant that overwhelmed even the odor of decay. The ranger photographed each case in situ, noting their positions and the security measures in place. One case had partially opened, revealing what appeared to be laboratory equipment, sample vials, a portable centrifuge, and several sealed containers marked with biohazard symbols. The implications sent a chill through him despite the desert heat. Moving to the front of the vehicle, he examined the dashboard and console more thoroughly. The vehicle's navigation system had been disabled or removed entirely, unusual for a government vehicle. The radio equipment appeared standard, but was set to frequencies outside normal government bands. In the center console, he found a satellite phone, significantly more advanced than those typically issued to field personnel, and a leather credential wallet. Using the tip of his pen, the ranger carefully opened the wallet to reveal an identification card bearing the insignia he had noticed on the briefcase. The photo showed a stern-faced man in his 50s, but the name and title had been deliberately obscured with what appeared to be a chemical solution that had dissolved portions of the card. Only partial letters remained visible, insufficient to reconstruct the information. The ranger photographed the ID, then carefully replaced it exactly as found. He noticed something else in the console, a small digital storage device, similar to a USB drive, but with an unfamiliar connection interface. This too he photographed without touching. Moving around to the passenger side, he examined the briefcase more carefully. The biometric lock appeared to require both a fingerprint and a 6-digit code. Without these, accessing the contents would be impossible without specialized equipment. The ranger noted the case's apparent weight and rigid structure, reinforced, possibly even armored to protect its contents. After completing his documentation of the vehicle's interior, the ranger conducted a careful sweep of the surrounding area in expanding circles. Approximately 50 yards north of the vehicle, partially hidden beneath a mesquite tree, he discovered fresh disturbance in the soil. A small area, perhaps 3 feet in diameter, where the desert crust had been broken and recently replaced. The attempt to conceal the disturbance had been professional but hasty, detectable to his trained eye. He photographed the site from multiple angles, then carefully removed the loose topsoil. 6 inches down, his hand encountered fabric, what appeared to be a field jacket similar to those issued to government personnel working in remote areas. Excavating further with care, he revealed the jacket contained papers, most burned beyond legibility, but several fragments remained intact. He photographed these in place before carefully extracting the largest readable section. The document fragment contained what appeared to be coordinates and a series of timestamps, followed by technical language referencing containment procedures and protocol INDIGO SUMMIT. None of these terms corresponded to any environmental, law enforcement, or emergency protocols with which the ranger was familiar from his years of service or military background. As he continued his investigation of the burial site, a flash of color caught his eye, a small corner of plastic protruding from beneath another layer of soil. Carefully brushing away the dirt, he revealed a government-issue secure phone, its screen shattered but potentially still containing recoverable data. He added it to his photographic record, but left it in place. The ranger checked his watch again. 11:38 a.m. His scheduled check-in would be expected in 22 minutes. He needed to make decisions quickly. Returning to his vehicle, he radioed the regional dispatch center. Outpost 7 to dispatch, priority call, over. There was a brief pause before the response came. Dispatch receiving, go ahead Outpost 7. The ranger hesitated, carefully selecting his words. I've discovered an abandoned vehicle in the East Quadrant, grid section 24B. Appears to be a government vehicle. Unknown agency. Request instructions over. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Can you describe the vehicle in more detail, Outpost 7? Black SUV, government issue, no visible agency markings. License plates removed. Vehicle appears deliberately concealed in a ravine off established routes. Is there any indication of occupants or emergency situation? The ranger's hand tightened on the radio. The decision point had arrived. How much to reveal over an open channel? His instincts, honed through years of service and his brief military career, urged caution. Negative on current occupants. Vehicle contains sensitive materials. Request Senior Ranger and Law Enforcement response to my GPS coordinates. Stand by, Outpost 7. The radio fell silent for nearly 2 minutes, unusual for the typically prompt dispatch center. When the voice returned, it was different, older, with the clipped tones of regional administration. Ranger Outpost 7, this is Regional Supervisor Haynes. I understand you've discovered an abandoned government vehicle? Affirmative, sir. Vehicle appears deliberately placed, contains sensitive materials, possible biohazard. Request immediate secure response. Your current coordinates received. Mark the location, but do not disturb anything further. Return to your station immediately and file a priority report. We'll dispatch appropriate personnel. Sir, there's a situation here that may require return to your station immediately, Ranger. That's a direct order. Alternative agencies have jurisdiction in this matter. Acknowledge. The Ranger recognized the bureaucratic shutdown, the institutional disinterest that masked something else entirely. In 15 years of service, he had never been ordered away from a discovered vehicle without at least securing the scene. The supervisor's tone and the mention of alternative agencies triggered warning bells from his military days. Acknowledged, sir. Returning to station. Outpost 7 out. The Ranger clipped the radio back to his belt, his mind racing. The response confirmed his suspicions that this discovery transcended normal Park Service jurisdiction. The mention of alternative agencies suggested classified operations, possibly Department of Defense or Homeland Security, though neither explained the bizarre condition of the body or the advanced technology evident in the vehicle. He spent the next 15 minutes completing his documentation, taking GPS coordinates and additional photographs from multiple angles and distances to establish context. Then, following procedure to the letter but nothing beyond, he placed emergency markers 50 yards from the vehicle in each direction, standard protocol for securing a scene until investigators arrived. As he prepared to leave, the Ranger made a final circuit of the area. The ravens had continued to gather, now numbering perhaps 30 birds, their agitation visibly increasing. They focused exclusively on the vehicle rather than the disturbed soil site, another anomaly that registered in his professional assessment. Returning to his patrol vehicle, the Ranger drove back toward the station as ordered, his mind methodically processing the implications of his discovery and the administrative response. 20 years of combined military and Park Service experience told him that the situation was far from routine. The unnatural condition of the body, the advanced technology, the deliberate concealment, and now the immediate jurisdictional shutdown all pointed toward classified operations. By the time he reached the observation station, the Ranger had made his decision. He would file the official report as ordered, documenting everything except the most disturbing details of the body's condition and the specific nature of the materials found. Those details he would record separately in his personal field journal, insurance against whatever might follow. That evening, as sunset painted the desert in amber and crimson, the Ranger sat at his desk reviewing his notes and photographs. Through the station window, he observed 3 unmarked helicopters passing overhead, heading east toward the coordinates he had reported. No follow-up call had come from Regional Supervisor Haynes or any other administrative authority, another procedural anomaly that strengthened his suspicions. He carefully copied his official report and personal notes onto a secure drive, then placed it in the waterproof container he kept for his most important personal documents. Years of working within bureaucratic systems had taught him the value of independent documentation. Sleep would not come easily tonight. The Ranger knew that his discovery had placed him at the periphery of something far beyond standard Park Service concerns, something that powerful interests clearly wished to contain. As darkness fell completely over the desert, he made his decision. Tomorrow he would begin his own investigation, starting with research into Protocol INDIGO Summit and the strange insignia he had documented. The desert kept many secrets, but in 15 years of service, the Ranger had learned that even the most carefully buried truths eventually surfaced in this harsh landscape. Whatever had happened in that ravine, whatever had caused a human body to transform into something unrecognizable, someone knew the truth, and now, so did he. Dawn broke reluctantly over the desert basin, the sun obscured by an unusual bank of clouds that had rolled in overnight. The Ranger had slept fitfully, his dreams filled with distorted images of crystalline patterns spreading across human skin. He rose before his alarm, feeling the weight of yesterday's discovery pressing against his consciousness. After a hurried cup of coffee, he changed into civilian clothes, worn jeans and a plain button-down shirt that wouldn't draw attention. His service vehicle would be too conspicuous for what he planned today. Instead, he retrieved his personal truck from the equipment shed where he kept it during extended shifts. The aging pickup was dusty and unremarkable, perfect for blending in at his destination. The Ranger drove west for nearly an hour, away from his jurisdiction and toward the county seat, a modest desert town that served as the regional administrative hub. As he navigated the increasingly populated roads, he mentally reviewed his approach. Direct inquiries about classified operations would only alert whoever had ordered yesterday's helicopters. Instead, he needed historical context, patterns of unusual government activity in the region that might connect to what he'd discovered. The county records office occupied the first floor of an aging administrative building downtown. Its weathered sandstone exterior spoke to the region's boom period 50 years earlier, when mining operations had briefly flourished before the economic collapse. The Ranger parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, a nondescript backpack containing his personal notebook and a small camera. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals. The air conditioning labored against the morning heat, creating a stale atmosphere that smelled of paper and industrial carpet cleaner. 3 civilians occupied computer stations, researching property records or genealogical information. A solitary clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain, manned the front desk, her attention focused on a crossword puzzle. The Ranger approached with practiced casualness. "Good morning. I'm researching the historical development of federal land use in the Eastern Basin. Specifically, I'm interested in any records from the 1970s through 1990s about government facilities or land acquisitions." The clerk looked up, assessing him with the weary efficiency of a career bureaucrat. "Academic research?" "Environmental history project," he replied with a half-truth, "tracking changes in land designation over time." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his explanation. "Terminal 4 has the digitized federal land records. Anything before 1985 will be in the microfiche cabinet. Section C, drawers 12 through 15. Sign the visitor log and leave your ID at the desk." The Ranger hesitated at surrendering identification, but complied, using his personal driver's license rather than his service credentials. He signed the log with his real name but an invented university affiliation, then made his way to the assigned terminal. For the next 2 hours, he methodically combed through land acquisition records, focusing on the eastern quadrant where he'd discovered the vehicle. Most transactions followed expected patterns: Bureau of Land Management consolidations, Park Service expansions, military training ground designations. But in 1983, he discovered an anomaly: a 640-acre parcel transferred from the BLM to the Department of Energy, with the classification Environmental Monitoring Station, NR 47. The designation seemed innocuous, but several details raised his suspicions. The parcel's location was approximately 12 miles northeast of yesterday's discovery site. The transfer documentation lacked the environmental impact statements typically required for such acquisitions. Most tellingly, the facility had been decommissioned and listed as remediated in 1997, yet appeared on no public access maps and had generated no subsequent land use records. The Ranger copied the coordinates and facility designation, then moved to the microfiche records for deeper historical context. In Cabinet C, Drawer 14, he located county newspaper archives from the early 1980s. Scanning methodically through months of weekly editions, he found a small article from September 1983. Environmental Research Station brings jobs to Region Federal Project to monitor radiation levels will employ 30-40 scientific and security personnel. The article mentioned construction vehicles traveling to the site, but provided no specific location due to security considerations. A follow-up piece 3 months later noted local concerns about unmarked vehicles and increased air traffic in the Eastern Basin, but assured readers that all activities were routine environmental monitoring. The Ranger photographed both articles with his personal camera, then returned to the computer terminal to search for any connection to INDIGO Summit. The term yielded no results in the public database. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a wall display of historical photographs. Regional Development, 1950-2000. Scanning the images, he paused at a black and white photograph labeled Scientific Progress, 1984. It showed 3 men in suits standing before a chain-link fence, their faces partially obscured by the camera angle. Behind them stood a cluster of prefabricated buildings with a small satellite array. The background terrain matched the Eastern Basin's distinctive rock formations. Most importantly, barely visible on one building's exterior was an insignia, similar to the one he'd documented on the briefcase in the abandoned vehicle. The ranger photographed the display image, then approached the clerk again. "I'm interested in the environmental monitoring station, Area 47. Do you have any site plans or decommissioning records?" The clerk's expression shifted subtly, a barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes. "Those records would be federal, not county. You'd need to submit a Freedom of Information request through the Department of Energy." Her tone had cooled noticeably. "I understand. One last question. Who donated the historical photographs in the wall display?" "Those came from the Regional Historical Society's collection," she replied. "They maintain the full archives at their research library across town." The ranger thanked her and retrieved his ID, noting that the clerk watched him until he exited the building. Her reaction to his specific inquiry confirmed his suspicion that the environmental monitoring station warranted further investigation. The Regional Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian home on the town's east side. Unlike the sterile government office, this building exuded the comfortable mustiness of preserved history: wooden floors that creaked underfoot, glass display cases containing mining equipment and Native American artifacts, and walls lined with sepia-toned photographs of frontier settlements. The curator, a bearded man in his 50s with the disheveled appearance of an academic, greeted him enthusiastically. "Historical societies in remote regions rarely receive visitors interested in their collections. I'm researching the Department of Energy's presence in the region during the 1980s, the ranger explained, particularly their environmental monitoring facilities. If the curator found the inquiry unusual, he didn't show it. Fascinating period. The Cold War's final decade left quite a footprint out here. Most people focus on the mining history, but the federal presence shaped the region just as significantly." He led the ranger to a research room lined with metal shelving units. "We have several oral history collections from that era, including interviews with contract workers who helped construct some of those facilities." For the next hour, the ranger listened to digitized recordings of local construction workers who had been employed at various government sites. Most described standard infrastructure projects, but one interview, with a retired heavy equipment operator, contained valuable information. They had us building access roads and foundation pads, but the actual structures were assembled by government contractors brought in from back east. Security was tight. Perimeter fencing went up first, and we needed daily clearance just to enter the site. Strangest thing was the underground component. We excavated huge sections, much bigger than needed for simple foundations or utilities. 3 sublevels at least, from what I could tell, before they restricted us to surface work only. When I asked the project manager about it, he said it was for environmental sample storage. Never made sense to me why they'd need that much underground space in the middle of nowhere. The interview continued with descriptions of unusual equipment deliveries, specialized air handling systems, reinforced doors, and enough electrical capacity to power a small city. The worker also mentioned unusual health monitoring protocols, including blood tests before and after each shift. After they finished construction, the place just disappeared from conversation. The recording concluded. No locals got permanent jobs there. No one talked about it. Just became another restricted area on the map that everyone drove around, not through. The ranger thanked the curator and requested copies of relevant materials, which the enthusiastic historian provided without question. As he prepared to leave, the curator mentioned one last resource. "If you're really interested in those facilities, you might want to check the abandoned access road off Highway 47. About 20 miles east of the junction, there's a service road that's been blocked for decades. The main facility is long gone, but some of the perimeter infrastructure is still visible if you know where to look. Officially off limits, of course, but historians sometimes bend the rules for research purposes." He winked conspiratorially. By early afternoon, the ranger had located the access road described by the curator. A rusted gate bearing faded U.S. government property, no trespassing, signs blocked the entrance, but years of desert winds had created a gap between the gate and the surrounding fence line. He parked his truck in a dry wash a quarter-mile away, obscured from the highway, and proceeded on foot with his backpack containing water, his camera, and basic tools. The access road had deteriorated significantly, cracked asphalt reclaimed by desert vegetation, with only the graded elevation indicating its original path. After a 40-minute hike, the ranger encountered the remains of a security checkpoint, a concrete foundation with rusty rebar protruding at intervals, and the decaying remnants of a guard booth. Beyond this point, the facility's perimeter took shape. Chain-link fencing, collapsed in sections but still standing in others, enclosed approximately 40 acres. Within this boundary, concrete pads marked where buildings had once stood. Most structures had been completely removed, leaving only foundation footprints and the occasional metal fixture. The ranger photographed these remains methodically, noting the layout's similarity to the historical photograph he'd seen earlier. On the site's northern edge, a larger concrete structure remained partially intact, a bunker-like installation built into a hillside. Its reinforced door had been removed, leaving a dark opening like a wound in the hillside. The ranger approached cautiously, switching on his flashlight as he entered. Inside, the space opened into what appeared to have been an equipment room. Heavy mounting brackets bolted to the floor suggested machinery had been removed. The walls bore evidence of hastily dismantled electrical systems, cut cables and empty junction boxes. Deeper inside, he discovered a sealed door, welded shut with industrial-grade steel plates. Someone had taken extraordinary measures to prevent access to whatever lay beyond. Most revealing was a faded hazard symbol on the welded door, a modified biohazard emblem with additional elements he didn't recognize. Below it, barely visible beneath decades of dust, was the insignia matching the one from the abandoned vehicle and the historical photograph. The ranger documented everything, then exited the bunker. As he surveyed the site once more, a detail caught his attention. A small concrete structure approximately 50 yards east of the main foundation pads. Unlike the other remains, this appeared to be a service access point for underground systems, possibly the extensive sublevels mentioned in the construction workers' oral history. The access hatch had been secured with a padlock that had succumbed to decades of weathering. With minimal effort, the ranger broke the corroded mechanism and lifted the heavy cover. Below, a metal ladder descended into darkness. The air that rose from the opening carried a faint chemical odor, not the expected mustiness of an abandoned structure, but something sharper and more recent. The ranger hesitated, weighing the risks of descent against the value of potential evidence. His flashlight beam revealed the ladder extended approximately 20 feet down to a concrete floor. The beam's limited range couldn't illuminate what lay beyond. He decided against immediate descent. Proper exploration would require additional equipment and safety precautions. Instead, he lowered his camera on its strap, using the timer function to capture several images of the area directly below the access point. When he retrieved it and reviewed the photos, he saw what appeared to be a corridor extending in both directions, its walls lined with the same insignia he'd been tracking. Most importantly, one image captured recent boot prints in the dust covering the floor. The facility wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. The ranger returned to his outpost before sunset, taking a circuitous route and frequently checking for surveillance. The day's discoveries had confirmed his suspicions. The abandoned vehicle connected to historical government operations in the region, operations that had apparently continued in some capacity despite official decommissioning. He spent the evening organizing his findings and preparing equipment for a return to the ravine where he'd discovered the vehicle. The unmarked helicopters he'd observed yesterday suggested the SUV might have been removed, but the site could still yield additional evidence. Most importantly, he needed to document any changes. Proving intervention would be as valuable as the original discovery. At 3:47 a.m., the ranger left his outpost, using his personal vehicle rather than the easily identified service SUV. He parked 2 miles from the ravine coordinates and approached on foot, using natural terrain features for concealment. The pre-dawn darkness provided optimal conditions for avoiding detection, while his familiarity with the territory allowed confident navigation even in limited visibility. As he neared the ravine, he activated his night vision monocular, personal equipment from his military days rather than standard-issue gear that might be tracked. Through the green-tinted view, he observed the site from an elevated position before approaching. The government vehicle was gone, as expected. More surprising was the thoroughness of the removal operation. The entire area had been processed with professional precision. Not just the vehicle extracted, but the surrounding terrain methodically altered to eliminate evidence of its presence. Even the broken vegetation had been removed and replaced with matching plants from elsewhere in the ravine. The ranger descended carefully, documenting the remediation efforts. Where the vehicle had been positioned, the ground had been excavated to a depth of approximately 6 inches. The soil replaced with identical material likely brought in by helicopter. Under normal circumstances, even an experienced investigator would find no indication that anything unusual had occurred here. But the ranger wasn't looking for obvious evidence. Instead, he focused on the peripheral areas, locations unlikely to receive the same meticulous attention during a hasty nighttime operation. 50 yards from the vehicle's former position, he discovered what he was seeking, a temporary equipment staging area where the recovery team had prepared their materials. Here, boot prints and equipment impressions remained in the sandy soil. Most valuable was a discarded nitrile glove partially buried at the site's edge. The ranger photographed it in situ, then carefully collected it in an evidence bag. The glove bore the same insignia he'd been tracking, confirming the connection between the abandoned vehicle and the supposedly decommissioned facility. More disturbing was what he discovered at the location where he'd found the disturbed soil containing burned documents. This area had received particular attention from the recovery team. Excavated to nearly 3 feet depth and refilled with imported soil, whatever had been buried there held special significance, importance enough to warrant complete removal rather than simple remediation. The ranger expanded his search pattern, moving in widening circles from the original site. Approximately 200 yards northwest, in a dry streambed rarely visited even by wildlife, he discovered a surveillance device camouflaged as a rock formation. The technology was sophisticated, motion-activated, solar-powered, with what appeared to be satellite transmission capability. Its position provided optimal coverage of the approach routes to the ravine. Rather than disabling the device, which would alert its operators, the ranger documented its presence and continued his search, now careful to remain outside its detection range. The presence of active surveillance confirmed his growing certainty. Whatever had happened here represented ongoing operations, not a historical anomaly. By dawn, he had compiled substantial documentation of the recovery operation without triggering the surveillance system. The desert light revealed additional details missed in darkness: helicopter skid marks on a nearby ridge, marking an observation position, and discarded packaging from specialized equipment bearing partial manufacturer codes that he photographed for later research. Most significantly, the ranger discovered a sample collection case apparently dropped during the operation. Hidden beneath a creosote bush 50 yards from the surveillance device, the reinforced container held hermetically sealed vials containing soil samples. Labels on the vials referenced Protocol INDIGO Summit and Contamination Assessment Phase 2. The ranger photographed each component in detail before carefully returning the case to its position. The recovery team might return for the missing equipment, providing an opportunity to observe their procedures if he established his own surveillance. As morning heat built across the desert basin, the ranger retreated from the site, taking an indirect route back to his vehicle. The sun had climbed fully above the horizon by the time he reached his truck, illuminating the landscape in harsh clarity that seemed at odds with the shadowy operations he was uncovering. Back at his outpost, he downloaded and encrypted his photographs on a personal device disconnected from government networks. The evidence painted an increasingly disturbing picture: a classified operation involving biological or chemical agents, a decades-long government presence in the region operating under environmental monitoring cover, and now active surveillance and contamination assessment protocols. Most concerning was the condition of the body he'd discovered. The unnatural coloration and crystalline patterns suggested exposure to whatever substance these operations involved. The ranger considered the implications for his own safety, having been in proximity to the vehicle and its contents. Had he been exposed to something dangerous? The recovery team's use of full protective equipment suggested significant hazard. He spent the afternoon researching the limited information he'd gathered. The manufacturer codes from the discarded packaging traced back to a defense contractor specializing in CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear containment systems. References to contamination assessment aligned with protocols used for evaluating exposure zones after material releases. By evening, the ranger had compiled his findings into a comprehensive report, separate from his official duty documentation. The report included all photographs, coordinate data, historical connections, and his professional assessment of the situation. He created 3 encrypted copies, one stored on his personal device, one on a removable drive hidden in his quarters, and one uploaded to a secure cloud storage service under an anonymous account. The pattern was clear. Something had been developed or stored at the supposedly decommissioned facility. A containment failure or security breach had occurred. The vehicle and its unfortunate occupant represented an aspect of that breach. Now, a specialized team was assessing contamination spread while maintaining absolute operational security, including surveillance of potential witnesses like himself. The ranger knew his next steps would escalate the situation beyond any possibility of retreat. Once he approached outside authorities with this information, he would become a priority target for whatever agency was running the operation. But the alternative, allowing a potential CBRN incident to remain unreported, violated every principle of his service oath and personal ethics. Tomorrow, he would need to find allies outside the compromised local chain of command. The ranger awoke to the sound of his service radio crackling to life at 5:30 a.m. The dispatcher's voice carried the flat professionalism of routine operations, but the message was anything but standard. Outpost 7, this is dispatch. You're instructed to report to regional headquarters at 0800 for administrative review. Confirm receipt. Administrative reviews were typically scheduled weeks in advance with formal documentation. An immediate summons following his investigation could not be coincidence. Dispatch, Outpost 7 confirming. May I ask the nature of the review? Documentation irregularities in recent reports. Regional Supervisor Haynes will provide details at HQ. Dispatch out. The ranger considered his options as he dressed. Reporting as ordered would place him under direct scrutiny, potentially limiting his movements and communications. Failing to appear would immediately escalate his status from person of interest to active concern. Either choice carried significant risk. He decided to comply with the order but prepare contingencies. He gathered essential documentation and equipment in his personal backpack, positioning it for quick retrieval if necessary. The most sensitive materials remained encrypted on devices hidden throughout his quarters. Most importantly, he activated a location-sharing protocol on his personal phone that would alert a former military colleague if he failed to check in by noon. As the ranger prepared his service vehicle for departure, he conducted a thorough inspection, checking under the chassis, examining the engine compartment, and testing all operational systems. The inspection revealed his first concrete evidence of interference. The vehicle's onboard navigation system had been accessed overnight. The access panel showed subtle tool marks, and the system's security seal had been replaced with a near-identical substitute. More concerning, a small transmitter had been installed behind the dashboard, connected to the vehicle's power supply, a tracking device more sophisticated than standard Park Service equipment. The ranger photographed the modifications without removing them. Direct tampering would alert whoever had installed the devices. Instead, he completed his vehicle inspection as if nothing were amiss, then returned to his quarters for a final security check before departure. On his desk, centered precisely on his duty logbook, lay a folded note that had not been there the previous evening. The paper was standard government stock, the type used in all federal offices. The message, printed rather than handwritten, consisted of 5 words. Some questions are never answered. The ranger photographed the note without touching it, then carefully placed it in an evidence bag using tweezers from his investigation kit. The message itself was vague enough to maintain plausible deniability if discovered, but its placement in his locked quarters delivered the intended message clearly. His activities were being monitored, his security compromised. Rather than proceeding directly to regional headquarters as ordered, the ranger made a calculated detour. 20 minutes into his journey, he stopped at a roadside scenic overlook popular with tourists. Among the handful of early morning visitors photographing the desert vista, he approached a young couple with Canadian license plates on their rental car. "Excuse me," he began, displaying his service credentials. "We're having some communications issues this morning. Could I trouble you to deliver a sealed envelope to the county sheriff's office when you visit town later? It contains updated trail condition reports that need to be filed today." The tourists agreed readily. Pleased to assist a uniformed authority figure, the ranger handed them an envelope containing a flash drive with selected evidence files and a brief summary of his investigation, addressed to the county sheriff's office. The tourists' foreign status and obvious disconnection from local affairs made them ideal unwitting couriers, unlikely to be monitored by whoever had placed the note in his quarters. By 7:58 a.m., the ranger arrived at regional headquarters. a modern two-story building housing administrative offices for the entire protected lands complex. The facility's manicured landscaping and polished interior projected institutional authority, a stark contrast to the rugged outposts where field personnel like himself operated. At the reception desk, he identified himself and reported as ordered. The administrative assistant, a middle-aged woman whose carefully neutral expression suggested years of bureaucratic conditioning, directed him to wait in Conference Room B. "Regional Supervisor Haynes will join you shortly," she informed him without making eye contact. Conference Room B was a windowless interior space typically used for sensitive personnel matters, disciplinary actions, medical reviews, security concerns. Its location ensured privacy from public areas, and its lack of windows prevented observation from outside the building. The ranger noted the room's single entrance exit and the security camera mounted in the corner as he took a seat at the table. 27 minutes passed before the door opened. Regional Supervisor Haynes entered, accompanied by two men in suits whose demeanor immediately registered as federal law enforcement. Neither wore visible identification, but their posture, haircuts, and situational awareness marked them as agency personnel rather than local authorities. "Ranger," Haynes began without preamble, "these gentlemen are from the Department of Homeland Security. They have some questions about your recent activities in the Eastern Quadrant." The taller of the two men placed a folder on the table. "We understand you discovered an abandoned vehicle 2 days ago and filed an incomplete report regarding the incident." "I filed a complete report as instructed," the ranger replied evenly, noting the careful phrasing, not a question but a statement designed to elicit defensive response. "Your report omitted several key details about what you observed inside the vehicle," the second man stated. "We need a full accounting of everything you saw, photographed, or removed from the scene." The ranger maintained his professional demeanor while evaluating the scenario. These men clearly knew about his discovery, but their questions suggested uncertainty about exactly what he had documented. More importantly, they were operating through formal channels rather than the direct approach used by whoever had searched his quarters and modified his vehicle. Multiple agencies with different agendas, perhaps. "I documented a government vehicle in an unusual location and reported it through proper channels," he responded. "Regional Supervisor Haynes instructed me to return to my station immediately and file a report, which I did. The vehicle contained materials outside my jurisdiction, as I noted." "What specific materials did you observe?" pressed the taller agent. "As stated in my report, the vehicle contained what appeared to be scientific equipment and secured cases. I didn't inventory the contents as I was ordered to leave the scene." The questioning continued for 43 minutes, the agents alternating between specific inquiries about the vehicle contents and broader questions about his activities over the past week. Their technique was professional but standard, attempting to identify inconsistencies or omissions in his responses that would indicate deception. Throughout the interview, Regional Supervisor Haynes remained silent, observing with the detached interest of a career administrator witnessing procedural formalities. His expression betrayed nothing, but the ranger noted his supervisor's hands, clasped tightly on the table, knuckles white with tension. Whatever was happening extended beyond Haynes's authority, placing him in an uncomfortable position between agency demands and administrative responsibilities. Finally, the taller agent closed his notebook. "We'll need you to remain available for additional questions. Consider yourself on administrative leave pending security review. Surrender your service weapon and credentials to Regional Supervisor Haynes, and restrict your movements to your residence and this headquarters until further notice." The ranger complied, understanding that resistance would only accelerate whatever process was unfolding. As he placed his service firearm and ID on the table, he maintained eye contact with Haynes, searching for any indication of the supervisor's actual position in this scenario. The older man's expression remained professionally blank, but his eyes momentarily flicked toward the security camera, a subtle warning. After the agents departed, Haynes gathered the surrendered items with a bureaucratic efficiency that masked their conversation from the camera's perspective. "Follow procedure exactly," he murmured, barely audible. "Complete the required forms in triplicate, paper copies only, file with records personally." The ranger recognized the message embedded in the administrative directive. Records division occupied the building's basement level, a warren of filing cabinets and storage rooms staffed by longtime employees who operated largely independent of changing administrative priorities. By suggesting personal filing of paper documentation, Haynes was directing him toward potential allies outside the digital monitoring systems. In the records division, the ranger presented his administrative leave paperwork to the attendant, a junior clerk in his 20s who appeared perpetually overwhelmed by the department's relentless paper flow. As the young man processed the forms, the ranger casually mentioned his current situation: administrative leave pending security review. Apparently finding an abandoned vehicle is cause for DHS intervention these days. The clerk's hands faltered briefly. Eastern Quadrant? He asked without looking up. Yes, grid section 24B. The young man continued processing the paperwork, but his voice dropped to a near whisper. You're the third this year. Equipment Tech found something in March. Geological survey contractor in May. Both transferred. No contact since. Before the ranger could respond, the records room's door opened. An older woman, the division supervisor, judging by her authoritative posture, approached the desk. Franklin, the quarterly compliance reports need immediate attention. I'll finish this processing. The young clerk nodded and retreated to a back room, but not before giving the ranger a significant look, a warning combined with what appeared to be genuine concern. The supervisor completed the paperwork with brisk efficiency, stamping each copy without conversation. As she returned his carbon duplicate, she slid a small business card beneath the form. Your copy of the administrative directive. Please review all sections carefully before signing any additional documents. The card bore no name or title, only a phone number with an area code from a neighboring state. The ranger pocketed it without comment and departed headquarters, aware that his movements were likely being monitored through both the tracking device in his vehicle and conventional surveillance. Returning to his outpost by mid-afternoon, the ranger found a second message waiting, this one more direct than the first. The door to his quarters stood open despite having been locked upon his departure. Inside, his personal laptop had been positioned at the center of his desk, powered on and displaying a text document that had not existed previously. Your continuing interest in matters beyond your jurisdiction has been noted. Previous inquiries into these matters have resulted in significant career and personal complications. Reconsider your current trajectory while options remain available. Unlike the first message, this one abandoned pretense. Someone with significant technical capability and operational freedom had accessed his locked quarters, compromised his personal computer, and left an explicit threat. The escalation suggested his activities had triggered increased concern from whatever agency was monitoring him. The ranger conducted a thorough search of his quarters, identifying 3 additional surveillance devices, one in his living area, one in his bedroom, and one monitoring his desk. Like the vehicle tracker, these were sophisticated systems beyond standard government issue, likely operating on encrypted channels to avoid detection. Rather than removing the devices which would prompt immediate response, he continued his evening routine as if unaware of their presence. He prepared a simple dinner, reviewed mundane work documents, and appeared to retire early, all while carefully avoiding any activity that would reveal his awareness or continued investigation. Once darkness fell completely, the ranger implemented his contingency plan. The bathroom exhaust fan, old and notoriously loud, provided audio coverage while he composed a comprehensive summary of his findings on paper. He included the coordinates of the abandoned facility, details of the vehicle discovery, and connection to Protocol INDIGO Summit, along with his assessment of the surveillance and intimidation tactics now being employed against him. This document, along with a USB drive containing key photographic evidence, was sealed in a waterproof pouch and hidden within his shower kit, an innocuous location unlikely to draw attention during cursory searches. Tomorrow, he would need to move this material to a secure location off-site. More immediately, he needed to contact potential allies using communications channels outside normal monitoring. The business card provided by the records supervisor represented his most promising lead. Its out-of-state area code suggested connections beyond local jurisdiction, possibly a journalist, inspector general's office, or even congressional oversight staff. The ranger lay in bed that night, maintaining the appearance of normal sleep patterns for the surveillance devices while his mind methodically processed strategies and contingencies. The situation had escalated beyond professional curiosity into clear personal danger. 3 people had apparently investigated similar discoveries this year alone, all subsequently transferred with no further contact. Whatever lay beneath the desert, whatever had caused the horrific transformation of the body in the government vehicle, represented something powerful interests were willing to threaten and intimidate to protect. But their increasingly heavy-handed approach suggested something else equally important: genuine fear of exposure. Tomorrow, he would make contact with whoever the record supervisor had directed him toward. The government vehicle and its grisly contents had been only the beginning. Something much larger waited beneath the desert surface, something connected to Protocol INDIGO Summit and decades of classified operations disguised as environmental monitoring. As false dawn painted the horizon, the ranger made his decision. He would continue his investigation, regardless of personal risk. Already awake, his mind crystallized into sharp focus after a night of strategic planning. The surveillance devices in his quarters had necessitated a performance of normal sleep patterns, but his mind had remained active, calculating risks and contingencies. Now, as official morning arrived, he began implementing his plan with methodical precision. He started his day with an ordinary routine: coffee, breakfast, routine maintenance checks of outpost equipment. For the benefit of the watching devices, he maintained the demeanor of a professional coming to terms with administrative leave. He reviewed procedural manuals, organized paperwork, and performed other mundane tasks that suggested compliance and resignation. Mid-morning, he made his first calculated move. Taking his personal vehicle, which he had confirmed also contained tracking devices, he drove into town for supplies, an innocent enough activity for someone with unexpected free time. At the general store, he purchased groceries, household items, and, crucially, a prepaid phone from a display near the register. The phone's purchase, buried among routine items, would likely register as insignificant to anyone monitoring his movements. In the store's restroom, he activated the prepaid device and called the number provided by the records supervisor. 3 rings, then a crisp, professional voice answered. "Environmental Journalism Desk. I have information about Protocol INDIGO Summit and contamination incidents in the Eastern Basin," the ranger stated without identifying himself. A brief pause. "Calling from an unsecured line. Switch to secure communication protocol. Text weather update to this number at exactly 1500 hours today. Delete this call record immediately." The line disconnected. The ranger removed the battery from the phone before exiting the restroom, then disposed of the components in separate trash receptacles around town. Whoever had answered clearly understood operational security. A journalist with intelligence connections, perhaps, or a government oversight investigator working outside official channels. Returning to his outpost, the ranger began preparing essential equipment while maintaining the appearance of ordinary activities. Into a weathered hiking backpack, the kind any outdoor enthusiast might use for a day trek, he methodically packed survival and documentation tools. The backpack's false bottom, a modification from his military days, concealed his most sensitive equipment: a secondary encrypted phone, digital camera with satellite transmission capability, and the comprehensive evidence file he had compiled. Standard gear completed the loadout: water purification system, high-energy rations, first aid kit, multi-tool, thermal blanket, compass, and topographical maps. Nothing that would raise suspicion if his quarters were searched again, but collectively sufficient for extended field operations if necessary. Next came the most critical preparation. At his desk, positioned deliberately within view of the surveillance device, the ranger composed 2 letters. The first, addressed to Regional Supervisor Haynes, expressed concern about unusual administrative procedures and requested formal review of his case, a bureaucratic paper trail that established legitimate questions about his situation. The second letter, sealed in an envelope and placed in his personal safe, contained the full narrative of his investigation, including coordinates, evidence descriptions, and contact information for his former military colleague who had been alerted to his situation. This letter represented insurance, documentation that would surface should he disappear as others apparently had. On his personal tablet, deliberately visible to surveillance, he researched innocuous topics: retirement benefits, recreational property listings in neighboring states, fishing license requirements. The digital breadcrumbs suggested a man contemplating his future after a potential career setback, not someone preparing for a high-risk investigation. By late afternoon, the ranger's preparations were complete. He had packed his vehicle with camping equipment, a plausible activity for someone with unexpected free time, and programmed his destination into the GPS system as a popular recreation area approximately 40 miles west of his actual target. The surveillance tracking devices would report his movements in real time, but the apparent trajectory would temporarily misdirect any monitoring team. At precisely 1500 hours, using a public computer at the visitor center rather than any personal device, he sent the requested text message to the contact number. The response came almost immediately. Weather system approaching from northwest. Meet local meteorologist at Cave Creek Overlook, 2100 hours. Come alone. Watch for wildlife. The ranger deleted the message and cleared the browser history. Cave Creek Overlook was a scenic viewpoint approximately 30 miles from the abandoned facility he had discovered. A public location with multiple access routes and clear sight lines that would allow verification of surveillance before any meeting. Watch for wildlife. Likely indicated counter-surveillance protocols would be in place. Before departing, the ranger completed one final task. He recorded a video message on his personal camera, providing a complete summary of his investigation and discoveries. This recording, stored on a memory card concealed within the lining of his boot, represented his ultimate insurance policy. He had arranged for it to be automatically delivered to multiple recipients, including his daughter at university, if he failed to enter a cancellation code every 24 hours. As sunset approached, the ranger locked his outpost and loaded the last of his equipment into his vehicle. Standing on the porch for a moment, he surveyed the desert landscape that had been his responsibility and home for 15 years. The vast wilderness had always contained secrets, ancient geological formations, hidden water sources, prehistoric cultural sites, but none as dangerous as what he now pursued. The ranger felt a strange calm as he started the engine and began his journey. Whatever awaited him in the coming hours, he had ensured that the truth would eventually emerge. Some questions demanded answers, regardless of the personal cost to those who asked them. The ranger executed his misdirection plan with precision. He drove west as programmed in his GPS, maintaining typical speed and stopping patterns that would register as normal behavior to anyone monitoring his tracker. At a remote campground 40 miles from his outpost, he pulled into a designated space and methodically set up camp, tent, cooking equipment, even a small fire that would be visible from aerial surveillance. After darkness fell completely, he implemented the next phase. Leaving his phone and official identification in the tent with a small radio playing at low volume, he slipped into the surrounding wilderness, carrying only his backpack. Half a mile from the campsite, a weathered pickup truck waited where his former military colleague had left it, keys concealed in the wheel well as arranged through coded messages days earlier. The ranger drove east using only minimal lighting, navigating primarily by his intimate knowledge of service roads and terrain features. The truck, belonging to a local rancher who owed the ranger a favor for past assistance, would raise no flags if observed, just another rural resident traveling the back roads that crisscrossed the region. By 20-30 hours, he had positioned the truck in a natural depression a mile from Cave Creek Overlook. The remaining distance he covered on foot, using natural terrain for concealment and moving with the practiced silence of someone who had spent decades in wilderness environments. The overlook itself was a simple rocky outcropping providing panoramic views across the desert basin. During tourist season, it attracted photographers and sightseers, but on this cool autumn night it stood empty and silent. The ranger approached with caution, using night vision equipment to scan for surveillance before entering the exposed area. At precisely 2100 hours, a figure emerged from the shadows of a rock formation on the overlook's northern edge. Medium height, wearing nondescript outdoor clothing, face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. The figure raised a hand in acknowledgement but maintained distance until the ranger fully entered the clearing. "Ranger," the voice was female, clipped and professional. "You've created quite a stir in certain circles. 3 separate agencies currently have resources allocated to your activities. And which circle do you represent?" the ranger asked, maintaining distance himself. "Office of the Inspector General, Department of Energy, Internal Oversight Division." She stepped forward enough for the moonlight to illuminate her features. Approximately 40 years old, with the focused expression of someone accustomed to navigating complex, bureaucratic battlefields. "I've been investigating Protocol INDIGO Summit for 14 months. You're the first field witness to make contact rather than accept reassignment." The body in the vehicle had crystalline formations embedded in the tissue, the ranger stated bluntly. "Nothing natural causes that kind of transformation." The investigator nodded. "Exposure to experimental metamaterials developed under the Summit program. The project officially ended in 1997, but certain elements continued under different classification structures. What you stumbled upon was a containment breach, Not the first, but potentially the most serious. For the next 17 minutes, she provided a briefing on the situation. The abandoned facility had indeed been an environmental monitoring station on official records, but its actual purpose involved developing materials that could alter fundamental physical properties for military applications. The research had produced unprecedented results, but with catastrophic biological side effects when exposure occurred. The decommissioning in 1997 wasn't about ending the program, she explained. It was about moving the most promising aspects deeper underground, both literally and bureaucratically. The original facility was partially dismantled, but the subterranean levels remained operational with a skeleton crew maintaining long-term experiments. What you found was evidence that something has gone wrong with the containment systems. The ranger shared his discoveries: the abandoned vehicle, the facility remnants, the surveillance and intimidation tactics. As they compared information, a comprehensive picture emerged. Decades of classified research conducted without proper oversight, multiple containment failures covered up through administrative maneuvers, and now a serious breach that threatened wider contamination. "I need access to the subterranean facility," the ranger concluded. Documented evidence of active operations and containment failure would provide the leverage necessary for official intervention. The investigator hesitated. "The security systems are sophisticated. Entering without proper—" "I found an access point that showed recent activity," he interrupted. "Minimal security on the surface entrance. They're focusing resources on containment, not perimeter defense." After further discussion, they developed a plan. The investigator provided official documentation that would help legitimize his findings once evidence was secured, along with contact protocols for reporting directly to her office. Most valuable was a specialized camera she provided, designed for covert documentation in sensitive facilities with automated encryption and satellite transmission capabilities. "Once you transmit evidence, I can mobilize an official response team," she explained. "But until then, my hands are tied by jurisdiction and classification barriers. Be careful. The operational security team for Summit doesn't answer to normal chains of command. They're essentially autonomous within their security mandate." They parted at 22:47 hours, the investigator heading west toward the highway, while the ranger returned to the borrowed truck. His course was now clear: infiltrate the subterranean facility, document the ongoing operations and containment breach, and transmit the evidence before security forces could intervene. The ranger drove through the night, using unmarked service roads and dry washes to approach the abandoned facility from its southern boundary, the opposite direction from his previous exploration. By 01:36 hours, he had positioned the truck in a narrow canyon approximately 1 mile from the target, concealed among rock formations that would shield it from aerial observation. The final approach he made on foot, using his night vision equipment to navigate while avoiding the surveillance devices he had previously identified. The desert night enveloped him in silence, broken only by the occasional call of nocturnal wildlife and the subtle whisper of wind across sand and stone. At the facility perimeter, the ranger paused to observe. The surface structures remained as abandoned as before, but now he noted subtle signs of activity: a ventilation system operating at minimal capacity, generating heat signatures barely detectable with his thermal equipment, and recently disturbed soil around several access points that would be invisible to casual observation. He approached the service access hatch he had discovered previously, now proceeding with full awareness of the boot prints he had observed during his last visit. The padlock remained broken from his earlier exploration, but someone had repositioned it to give the appearance of security while allowing convenient access, suggesting regular use by maintenance personnel. The ranger removed the hatch and examined the ladder descending into darkness. The air rising from below carried the same chemical odor he had noted before, but stronger now, with an underlying metallic component that triggered instinctive caution. He secured his breathing apparatus, a compact filter system from his military equipment, before beginning his descent. 20 feet down, the ladder ended at a small platform illuminated by emergency lighting. A reinforced door stood partially open, revealing a corridor beyond. The ranger documented everything with the specialized camera, transmitting initial images to establish baseline evidence before proceeding. The corridor extended approximately 30 meters, with several sealed doorways along its length. Most significant was the modern security system installed throughout: camera arrays, motion sensors, and electronic access panels that contrasted sharply with the facility's supposedly decommissioned status. The ranger avoided the camera sightlines, using maintenance recesses for concealment as he advanced deeper into the complex. At the corridor's end, a larger access door stood open, leading to what appeared to be a control center. Unlike the corridor's functional minimalism, this space featured advanced monitoring systems, workstations, and wall displays showing real-time data from multiple locations. Most importantly, the facility was currently unoccupied, shift change perhaps, or reduced nighttime staffing. The ranger moved quickly, photographing everything: duty rosters showing current personnel assignments, security protocols displayed on monitors, communication logs detailing recent incidents. On a central display, a map showed the facility's full layout: 3 underground levels, with the lowest designated Containment Zone Alpha, and currently flagged with warning indicators. Following the digital map, the ranger located an elevator providing access to the lower levels. Its security required an access card, but a maintenance shaft adjacent to the elevator offered an alternative route. The shaft, designed for equipment transfer rather than personnel, presented a tight fit, but sufficient access for someone with his physical conditioning. Descending to the second level, the ranger emerged into a research area containing laboratory equipment, specialized containment units, and extensive documentation. Here, the first concrete evidence of Protocol INDIGO Summit became visible: research logs detailing experiments with reality-altering metamaterials and their applications for defense technology. More disturbing were the medical records: test subjects exposed to these materials experiencing cellular transformation, tissue crystallization, and systemic failure. The reports documented the same patterns he had observed on the body in the abandoned vehicle, but in clinical detail that revealed the horrific progression of symptoms. The ranger transmitted these findings in compressed data packets, ensuring the evidence would reach the investigator regardless of what happened next. Then, following warning indicators on monitoring systems, he located access to the lowest level, Containment Zone Alpha. The security measures here were significantly more robust: biometric scanners, reinforced barriers, and hazard warnings that would deter most unauthorized personnel. But the ranger noted the same pattern as above: emergency systems engaged in a configuration that prioritized containing something within rather than keeping intruders out. Using an equipment transfer system designed for passing materials through containment barriers, the ranger gained access to the lowest level. As the sealed door cycled open, the environment changed dramatically, the air thicker, carrying particulates that sparkled faintly in his flashlight beam despite his breathing apparatus filtering the atmosphere. Containment Zone Alpha revealed the truth behind Protocol INDIGO Summit. The vast chamber, extending hundreds of meters beneath the desert surface, housed what could only be described as a breach in the fundamental structure of reality itself. At the chamber's center, contained within multiple energy fields and physical barriers, a phenomenon approximately 3 meters in diameter pulsated with unnatural light, neither solid nor energy, but something between states that shifted constantly. Surrounding this phenomenon, monitoring equipment gathered data while robotic systems adjusted containment parameters. Most horrifying were the effects visible on the chamber's elements: portions of metal structural components, concrete flooring, and even abandoned equipment showing the same crystalline transformations he had observed on the body. The metamaterials research had apparently created or contacted something that rewrote the physical properties of matter it encountered. The ranger documented everything, his specialized camera capturing details his human perception could barely process. This wasn't merely classified research or environmental contamination. It was something that fundamentally violated natural laws, contained beneath the desert by increasingly inadequate measures. As he completed his documentation from an observation platform overlooking the main chamber, a door opened on the far side. 3 figures entered wearing full containment suits, their movements suggesting routine inspection rather than emergency response. They hadn't detected his presence yet, focusing instead on monitoring equipment surrounding the phenomenon. The ranger prepared to retreat, his mission accomplished with the evidence now transmitting to the investigator. But as he turned toward his exit route, an alarm activated, harsh and immediate, echoing throughout the facility. On monitoring displays throughout the chamber, his thermal signature appeared highlighted against the background environment. He had been detected. The 3 technicians responded immediately, securing their stations and activating communication systems. From overhead speakers, An automated security alert announced containment breach protocols and deployed response teams. The ranger had perhaps 2 minutes before security personnel flooded the facility. Rather than attempting to backtrack through increasingly secured areas, he identified an emergency evacuation route on the facility schematic, a vertical shaft with ladder access designed for rapid facility evacuation in case of containment failure. The route would bypass the upper levels entirely, emerging approximately half a kilometer from the main facility perimeter. The ranger moved with controlled urgency, evading the initial response team by using his superior knowledge of the facility layout gained from the control center displays. The evacuation shaft's access required emergency override codes, but the facility's current alert status had automatically unlocked these systems, an ironic assistance from the very security protocols now targeting him. As he climbed the narrow shaft, the sounds of pursuit echoed below. Radio communications, security doors cycling, boots on metal flooring. The facility had fully mobilized in response to his intrusion, but their protocols focused primarily on preventing contamination spread rather than capturing a specific intruder. After 12 minutes of grueling ascent, the ranger reached the surface exit, a simple hatch concealed among rock formations several hundred meters from the main facility perimeter. As he emerged into the desert night, floodlights suddenly illuminated the main facility area behind him, and the whir of helicopter rotors announced aerial response units deploying. The ranger moved immediately away from the evacuation point, using natural terrain for concealment as he navigated by starlight. His knowledge of the desert's contours provided critical advantage. Where pursuit vehicles would need to follow established paths, he could traverse the landscape directly, cutting across drainages and scaling ridgelines that would force vehicles into time-consuming detours. For 47 minutes he maintained this advantage, putting nearly 3 miles between himself and the facility, while security forces established search patterns based on standard pursuit protocols. Their thermal imaging would be degraded by lingering heat signatures in the rocky terrain, and night vision effectiveness would be limited by the same landscape features he used for concealment. The ranger reached the concealed truck without visual or auditory evidence of direct pursuit. The specialized camera confirmed successful transmission of all documentation. The evidence was now beyond containment regardless of what happened to him personally. With this assurance, he started the vehicle and began navigating back toward populated areas, using only minimal lighting and maintaining awareness of aerial search patterns. By dawn, he had reached the outskirts of the county seat, where early shift workers and delivery vehicles provided anonymity among legitimate traffic. The security response, while significant within the remote facility area, could not extend its obvious presence into populated zones without attracting undesired attention. The ranger parked the borrowed truck in the lot of a 24-hour diner, a prearranged location where his military colleague would retrieve it later, and proceeded on foot to a motel where he had previously established a reservation under a generic cash payment. Safe for the moment, he verified that all evidence had been received by checking the secure communication channel established with the investigator. Her response was simple but confirmed success. Evidence received. Official response protocols initiated. Maintain current position. The ranger allowed himself his first deep breath since entering the facility. The truth about Protocol INDIGO Summit was now documented beyond any possibility of suppression. Whatever consequences followed for him personally, the containment breach and decades of unauthorized experimentation would face official scrutiny and public exposure. 48 hours later, the ranger sat at a corner table in a busy coffee shop in the state capital, 200 miles from his outpost. Across from him, the investigator from the Office of Inspector General maintained a professional demeanor that barely contained evident satisfaction. "The evidence you provided has triggered multiple oversight mechanisms," she explained, sliding a tablet across the table displaying official documentation. 3 separate congressional committees have initiated investigations. The National Security Council has established an emergency response protocol. Most importantly, an interagency containment team with appropriate clearance and equipment has secured the facility. On the tablet, satellite imagery showed the activity around the formerly abandoned facility, specialized vehicles, temporary structures, and security perimeters that transformed the once hidden site into a hive of official intervention. What had operated in shadow for decades now faced the harsh light of oversight. The individuals responsible for security and containment failures have been identified and detained, the investigator continued. The unauthorized continuation of the program after official decommissioning constitutes multiple federal violations. The incident with the vehicle you discovered was apparently the third containment breach this year, but the first to result in off-site exposure. The ranger reviewed the documentation, noting the careful language that balanced transparency requirements against national security concerns. And the phenomenon itself, the metamaterial breach? The investigator's expression tightened slightly. That remains classified at the highest levels, but I can tell you that legitimate scientific and security personnel are now managing containment with appropriate protocols. The unauthorized experimentation has been terminated. Your documentation of the crystalline transformations provided critical data for developing proper containment methodologies. She passed him a sealed envelope. Your administrative leave has been converted to special assignment status with the Inspector General's office. Full reinstatement to your previous position is guaranteed once the situation stabilizes, with appropriate security clearance adjustments. Alternatively, there are options for reassignment or early retirement with full benefits, should you prefer. The ranger accepted the envelope without opening it. Those decisions could wait. And public disclosure? Beginning today. The investigator gestured toward television screens mounted above the coffee shop counter, where a breaking news banner announced a major press conference from the Department of Energy regarding historical research misconduct and environmental safety violations at a decommissioned facility. On schedule, the department secretary appeared at a podium backed by American flags. The carefully crafted statement acknowledged unauthorized continuation of terminated research programs and serious protocol violations that had resulted in isolated containment incidents. An anonymous whistleblower within the department was credited with bringing the situation to official attention, triggering immediate corrective action and comprehensive review of oversight procedures. Around the coffee shop, patrons gradually turned their attention to the screens as the significance of the announcement became clear. Phones emerged to capture video or share the news on social media. Within minutes, notification alerts began sounding throughout the space as major news outlets pushed updates about the developing story. By this evening, it will be the lead story on every national network, the investigator noted. The classification barriers prevent full disclosure of the technical aspects, but the accountability narrative will receive complete coverage. Congressional oversight hearings begin next week, televised for public transparency. The ranger watched the varied reactions among the coffee shop patrons. Surprise, concern, the inevitable cynicism about government misconduct. The human dynamics were familiar and somewhat comforting after his encounter with phenomena that defied natural law. The system, for all its flaws, was responding as designed when properly activated. Your identity remains protected, the investigator assured him. The official record shows only an internal departmental investigation triggered by routine compliance review. Your involvement is documented only in classified channels with access restricted to essential oversight personnel. The ranger nodded, though personal consequences had ceased to be his primary concern. And the contamination risk to the surrounding region, the previous exposures? Comprehensive testing has been implemented across a 50-mile radius from the facility. Preliminary results show no evidence of spread beyond the documented incidents. The phenomenon's effects appear to require direct proximity rather than environmental transmission. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The families of the previous victims have been contacted through appropriate channels and will receive full disclosure to the extent security protocols allow. As their meeting concluded, the investigator provided final documentation, secure contact protocols for ongoing communication, scheduled briefings regarding the investigation's progress, and formal acknowledgement of his service signed by the Inspector General personally. The bureaucratic machinery that had initially attempted to suppress his discovery now worked to process and resolve it. The system's self-correction mechanisms finally engaged. Outside, the ranger walked through the capital's downtown district, anonymous among the lunchtime crowds. On every corner, newspaper headlines announced the breaking story. Digital billboards displayed the Department of Energy Secretary's image alongside stern statements about accountability and reform. In the modern information ecosystem, the story's momentum had already become unstoppable. By late afternoon, the ranger had relocated to a quiet park overlooking the city. From this elevated vantage point, he could observe the government complex where emergency sessions had been convened to address the situation. The distant buildings hummed with activity even as ordinary citizens enjoyed the park around him, largely unaware of the specific revelations prompting this governmental flurry. His secure phone received periodic updates from the investigator, congressional response, media coverage developments, containment operation status reports. The specialized response team at the facility had successfully stabilized the immediate situation and established more robust containment protocols. Scientific oversight committees were being established with appropriate clearance and expertise to evaluate the phenomenon properly. As sunset painted the sky in orange and crimson hues reminiscent of his desert home, the ranger reflected on the events that had brought him here. The random discovery of an abandoned vehicle had revealed layers of secrecy, danger, and fundamental questions about reality itself. His training and experience had prepared him to investigate unknown territories, but nothing could fully prepare anyone for confronting phenomena that challenged the foundations of natural law. The ranger's thoughts turned to his outpost, the desert landscape under his protection for 15 years. He would return eventually, whether to resume his duties or to collect his belongings before pursuing one of the alternative options presented in the sealed envelope. The decision could wait until the immediate situation had fully stabilized. What mattered most was that the truth had emerged. The crystalline horror he had witnessed in that abandoned vehicle would not be buried beneath bureaucratic classifications or security protocols. The victims would receive acknowledgement, the responsible parties would face consequences, and the phenomenon itself would be managed with appropriate scientific rigor and oversight. On a nearby bench, an elderly man read a newspaper with the containment breach story prominently displayed on the front page. The headline captured the essence without revealing classified details. Unauthorized government research program exposed after decades of secrecy. The public version, sanitized of reality-altering metamaterials and crystalline transformations, still delivered the core truth. Something dangerous had been hidden, and now faced the light. The ranger stood and began walking toward his temporary accommodations, his pace unhurried but purposeful. Whatever mysterious forces existed beneath the desert surface, the human systems of accountability and oversight were now engaged to contain them properly. Some questions might never receive complete answers, but the most important one had been resolved. The truth, however partial, now stood in the open rather than buried in darkness. In exposing Protocol Indigo Summit, he had fulfilled his most fundamental duty, not just to the Park Service or government agencies, but to the principles that gave those institutions legitimate purpose. The ranger had spent his career protecting natural wilderness. Now he had protected something equally important, the public's right to know what was being done in their name, beneath the desert they believed was simply empty space. The horror he had witnessed in that government vehicle would remain with him always, but so would the satisfaction of knowing that his discovery and his refusal to look away had finally brought light to something long hidden in darkness. For a ranger whose career had been defined by watching over remote landscapes, it was perhaps the most important observation he would ever make. 6 months after the public disclosure of Protocol Indigo Summit, the ranger stood at the edge of the visitor center parking lot, watching tourists photograph the desert sunset, the mundane scene, families in comfortable clothes, cameras raised to capture the brilliant colors painting the sky, stood in stark contrast to the classified hearings he had attended that morning via secure video link. The congressional investigation had expanded far beyond the initial containment breach. What began as an inquiry into a single unauthorized research program had uncovered a sprawling network of classified operations conducted without proper oversight or accountability. The Department of Energy's internal investigation, bolstered by the Inspector General's independent authority, had identified 17 senior officials involved in continuing the prohibited research after its official termination in 1997. Today's hearing had focused on the human cost. Testimony from medical experts confirmed that 11 individuals had died from exposure to the metamaterials over the past decade, deaths officially attributed to various natural causes through falsified records. The ranger's discovery of the body in the abandoned vehicle had provided the first documented evidence that couldn't be concealed within classified channels. The ranger's phone vibrated with an incoming message from the investigator who had become his primary contact with the oversight committees. Indictments unsealed today. 32 defendants total. Charges include criminal negligence resulting in death, conspiracy, environmental crimes, misappropriation of government resources, and obstruction of justice. First arraignments scheduled for next week. The formal prosecution represented just one aspect of the government's response. 3 separate executive orders had been signed establishing new oversight mechanisms for classified research, particularly involving novel materials and phenomena. The Department of Energy had undergone significant restructuring, with enhanced Inspector General authority and mandatory reporting channels for safety concerns. The National Security Council had established a dedicated review board for high-risk scientific programs, with multi-agency representation and direct congressional reporting requirements. Most importantly for the Ranger, the area surrounding the facility had undergone comprehensive environmental testing. Mobile laboratories had conducted soil, water, and air sampling across the entire eastern basin, with particular focus on areas frequented by the public. The results had confirmed the investigators' initial assessment. The metamaterial effects required direct proximity rather than environmental transmission. The landscape he had protected for 15 years remained safe for both wildlife and human visitors. The county seat where he had conducted his initial historical research had transformed in the months following the disclosure. National media had descended on the previously overlooked desert town, temporarily overwhelming its modest infrastructure with journalists, government investigators, and curious visitors drawn by the sensational story. Local businesses had experienced an unexpected economic boom, with hotels at capacity and restaurants serving customers around the clock. The Ranger had observed this transformation from a careful distance, his identity still protected by classification protocols. Only a handful of officials knew his role in exposing the program. To the public and media, the whistleblower remained anonymous, variously described as a government scientist with conscience, or an insider who could no longer remain silent. The Ranger preferred this anonymity, finding greater satisfaction in the results than any public recognition. Those results continued to expand in significance. International attention had focused on the United States' handling of the situation, with diplomatic inquiries from allied nations concerned about similar classified programs within their own borders. The United Nations Scientific Committee had established new protocols for research transparency, citing the INDIGO Summit case as evidence of the dangers posed by unaccountable scientific exploration. Global scientific journals had published special issues examining the ethics of high-risk materials research and the obligations of researchers to public safety. On the national level, the case had triggered broader examination of government secrecy and oversight failures. Congressional hearings, portions of which were televised for public transparency, featured testimony from oversight experts, former intelligence officials, and ethics specialists. The resulting legislation currently advancing through committee review promised the most significant reforms to classified program management since the 1970s. For the local community, the impact manifested in more immediate terms. The Ranger had witnessed residents struggling to reconcile their understanding of the region with the revelation that classified research had occurred literally beneath their feet for decades. Community meetings had addressed concerns about health impacts, environmental contamination, and ongoing safety. The Park Service had implemented enhanced monitoring protocols in the Eastern Basin, with regular public reporting to restore community trust. Most poignant were the families of the 11 identified victims, whose previous inquiries had been deflected with classified barriers and falsified explanations. The Ranger had observed from a respectful distance as these families received official acknowledgement, declassified briefings about their loved ones' deaths, and formal government apologies. Financial compensation was being arranged through special congressional appropriation, though no amount could truly address such losses. The Ranger's secure phone vibrated again with another message from the investigator. Containment protocols finalized today. International Scientific Oversight Committee approved. Permanent security and monitoring systems operational. Site transition from emergency response to long-term management complete. This represented perhaps the most significant outcome. The phenomenon itself, the reality-altering breach that had been improperly contained for decades, now resided under legitimate scientific study with appropriate safety protocols. The Ranger had reviewed the redacted briefings describing the multi-layered physical and energy barriers, continuous monitoring systems, and emergency response capabilities now surrounding the site. Whatever mysteries the metamaterials presented, they would be explored with proper caution and transparency. As the last tourists departed the visitor center parking lot, the Ranger remained, watching darkness reclaim the desert landscape. The stars emerged in familiar patterns, unchanged by the human dramas that had unfolded beneath them. The desert itself, ancient and enduring, had witnessed far greater transformations over geological time than anything human agencies could create or contain. Tomorrow, the ranger would return to Washington for a final debriefing before the classified aspects of the case transitioned to permanent oversight structures. But tonight, standing beneath the desert stars, he allowed himself to acknowledge a simple truth that transcended bureaucratic processes and institutional reforms. The system, however flawed and resistant, had ultimately corrected itself when confronted with undeniable evidence and individual courage. The ceremony took place in a wood-paneled conference room at Department of Interior headquarters, its formality constrained by the classified nature of the proceedings. Only 14 individuals attended: the Secretary of Interior, the Director of the Park Service, 3 Congressional Oversight Committee representatives, key investigators from the Inspector General's office, and senior officials from agencies involved in the INDIGO Summit response. The ranger stood at measured attention as the secretary addressed the small gathering, his service uniform freshly pressed for the occasion. "What we recognize today cannot be shared with the public in its complete form," the secretary began, "but history will record that the actions taken by this individual exemplify the highest traditions of government service and personal courage." The commendation that followed outlined the ranger's actions in carefully worded terms that balanced security requirements against the need to acknowledge truth. His persistence in pursuing proper protocols, despite institutional resistance, and commitment to public safety over administrative convenience, received particular emphasis. As the secretary presented the specially authorized medal, its design and designation themselves classified, the ranger maintained the composed demeanor that had characterized his 15 years of service. When invited to speak, he offered only brief remarks focused on the system rather than his individual role. "I simply followed the oath taken by all who serve in government positions," he stated. "The real recognition belongs to those who maintained proper channels for reporting concerns, those who responded when evidence was presented, and especially those whose sacrifices brought this situation to light." His reference to the victims prompted solemn nods around the room. Among the classified files now secured in proper oversight channels were the complete histories of those who had encountered the metamaterials without adequate protection, researchers working without proper safety protocols, security personnel exposed during containment failures, and maintenance workers unknowingly entering contaminated areas. Their stories, though partially redacted even in official records, had provided crucial evidence during the investigation and prosecution phases. Following the ceremony, the ranger met individually with key officials who had supported the investigation. The Inspector General personally acknowledged the risks he had taken. "Most people in your position would have accepted reassignment or retirement when pressured," she noted. "Your refusal to be silenced made all the difference." The congressional representatives offered their own perspective, explaining how the evidence he provided had overcome institutional resistance at the highest levels. When confronted with documented proof rather than anonymous allegations, even the most reluctant oversight committees found their courage, the senior representative explained. "Your methodical approach created an irrefutable record that couldn't be dismissed." The most meaningful was his conversation with the Park Service director, who addressed the personal cost the ranger had endured. "We failed you institutionally," the director acknowledged without qualification. "The system designed to support your mission instead attempted to silence your concerns. That represents a failure we must address beyond this specific case." The ranger listened to these acknowledgments with the same attentive focus he brought to monitoring desert wildlife patterns or tracking environmental changes in his jurisdiction. The institutional responses, like natural phenomena, revealed underlying systems at work: bureaucratic defense mechanisms, political calculation, professional solidarity, and occasionally, genuine commitment to public service. That evening, alone in his hotel room, the ranger reviewed the official commendation document, its classified markings restricting it from public display. The formal language captured the factual sequence of his actions, but missed the essential experience: the visceral horror of discovering the crystalline transformations in human tissue, the weight of institutional pressure attempting to suppress his investigation, the isolation of pursuing truth against systemic resistance. His thoughts turned to the families who had spent years seeking answers about their loved ones' deaths, only to encounter security classifications and institutional stonewalling. Their private ceremonies, held in living rooms and community centers across the country, carried greater significance than today's official recognition. The ranger had attended several such gatherings in an unofficial capacity, witnessing both grief and gratitude as families finally received acknowledgement of what had happened to their loved ones. The ranger stood at the hotel window overlooking the capital's illuminated monuments. The institutions represented by these structures had both failed and ultimately succeeded in this case, failed in their oversight responsibilities and susceptibility to secrecy over classification, but eventually succeeded in their accountability mechanisms and correction capabilities. The system remained imperfect, but its capacity for self-correction had ultimately prevailed. His reflection was interrupted by a call from his daughter at university. Their conversation, carefully navigating classification boundaries, focused on his imminent return to regular duties. "Are you sure you want to go back to the same position?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "After everything that happened?" "The desert hasn't changed," he replied simply. "It still needs protection." After the call ended, the ranger returned to the window, watching the capital's lights against the night sky. The experience had transformed his understanding of his role within the government system. What began as a straightforward discovery of an abandoned vehicle had revealed layers of institutional failure, scientific overreach, and moral compromise that extended to the highest levels of authority. Yet it had also revealed something else: the resilience of truth when pursued with methodical determination, and the power of properly functioning oversight systems when activated by irrefutable evidence. The horror he had witnessed in that government vehicle had led to necessary reforms, accountability for those responsible, and recognition for victims previously denied acknowledgement. Tomorrow, the ranger would return the medal to secure storage and resume the uniform and responsibilities he had carried for 15 years. The commendation would remain classified, its existence known only to those with appropriate clearance. This arrangement suited his preference for the quiet observation post over public recognition. The true measure of his actions lay not in medals or ceremonies, but in the concrete reforms now being implemented throughout the classified research system, the justice being pursued through prosecution of those responsible, and most importantly, the proper containment of the phenomenon beneath the desert surface. 3 weeks after the Washington ceremony, the ranger resumed his regular duties at the desert outpost. The transition back to daily patrols, visitor assistance, and environmental monitoring provided a welcome return to familiar rhythms after months of classified debriefings, testimony, and investigation support. His quarters remained as he had left them, though now cleansed of the surveillance devices that had once monitored his activities. His service vehicle had been replaced with an identical model, free from the tracking systems previously installed. These small restorations of privacy represented tacit acknowledgement of the improper tactics used against him during the investigation. The ranger's first weeks back followed standard protocols: Eastern Quadrant patrols on Tuesdays and Fridays, Western Section monitoring on Mondays and Thursdays, visitor center support on Wednesdays, administrative duties on weekends. The familiar routine provided structure as he readjusted to regular service after months of extraordinary circumstances. Yet subtle changes marked his return. Regional Supervisor Haynes had been reassigned to headquarters, replaced by a career ranger with a reputation for operational transparency. The Eastern Basin monitoring protocols had been enhanced, with additional environmental sampling stations established at regular intervals. Most noticeably, a new secured facility had been constructed at the former INDIGO Summit site, its purpose officially designated as long-term environmental monitoring, but its actual function understood by the ranger through his classified briefings. His colleagues treated him with a curious combination of deference and uncertainty. Though only a handful knew his direct involvement in the INDIGO Summit case, rumors had inevitably circulated about his extended special assignment, coinciding with the national news about classified research in the region. The ranger neither confirmed nor denied these speculations, maintaining the professional focus that had characterized his service before the discovery. On patrol, he found himself viewing familiar terrain through transformed awareness. The desert landscape remained objectively unchanged. The same rock formations, seasonal water patterns, and wildlife activities he had documented for 15 years. Yet his perception had fundamentally shifted, now carrying the knowledge that beneath this visible surface, phenomena existed that challenged conventional understanding of physical reality. The ranger's daughter visited during her university break, their relationship strengthened by the shared experience of the investigation period. Though bound by classification restrictions regarding specific details, he had kept her informed of his general involvement and safety throughout the process. During her visit, they hiked familiar trails and observed desert wildlife with a comfortable companionship that required no discussion of classified matters. "You seem different," she observed one evening as they watched the sunset from the observation station porch. "More at peace somehow." The ranger considered this assessment. "Completing a necessary task brings its own kind of satisfaction," he replied after a thoughtful pause, even when the task itself wasn't peaceful. 6 months after resuming his duties, the ranger received authorization for limited access to the secured facility that had replaced the abandoned INDIGO Summit site. The authorization came through proper channels, with appropriate documentation and security protocols, a marked contrast to his previous covert investigation. The facility bore little resemblance to either the abandoned surface structures he had explored or the subterranean levels he had infiltrated. Modern architecture housing advanced containment systems had replaced the deteriorating Cold War infrastructure. International scientific teams worked alongside security personnel, their presence ensuring both proper research protocols and transparent oversight. The Ranger's tour, conducted by the facility director, revealed how completely the operation had transformed. "The phenomenon remains essentially unchanged," the director explained as they observed monitoring displays showing the containment chamber. "But our understanding and management approaches have fundamentally shifted. What was once exploited for potential weapons applications is now being studied for its implications for fundamental physics, with rigorous safety protocols and international scientific review." Most significant was the memorial established within the facility's administrative section, a simple wall bearing the names and service dates of those who had died from metamaterial exposure. The ranger recognized several names from the classified briefings, including the individual whose body he had discovered in the abandoned vehicle. The memorial represented official acknowledgement of a truth that had previously been buried beneath security classifications and institutional denial. The ranger's return visit to the ravine where he had made his initial discovery came during a routine patrol 11 months after resuming his duties. The location had been completely remediated, with no visible evidence remaining of either the abandoned vehicle or the subsequent recovery operation. Without the precise GPS coordinates stored in his memory, even he would have difficulty identifying the exact position where the government vehicle had been concealed. Standing at the spot, the ranger observed how nature had reclaimed the disturbed ground. Desert vegetation had reestablished itself, wildlife patterns had normalized, and the seasonal water flow through the ravine had erased the last physical traces of human activity. The desert's capacity for restoration, for erasing evidence of disturbance given sufficient time, demonstrated natural resilience that transcended human interventions. Yet something of that day remained, not in physical evidence, but in the transformed awareness the ranger carried as he surveyed the landscape. The horror he had encountered in the abandoned vehicle had revealed a reality beneath the visible surface, a truth that once recognized could not be unrecognized. The desert remained the same, but his perception of what it contained had fundamentally changed. As the ranger completed his patrol that day, he noticed increased security activity around the secured facility, convoy movements, helicopter operations, specialized equipment deliveries. His security clearance provided limited information about ongoing operations, but sufficient understanding to recognize that the containment systems were being enhanced further. Whatever lay beneath the desert surface continued to require careful management, despite all institutional reforms and international oversight. That night, reviewing his patrol logs at the observation station, the ranger received a secure communication from the investigator who had been his primary contact throughout the case. "New anomalies detected at secondary locations. Investigation ongoing. Your continued vigilance appreciated." The message confirmed what he had already suspected. The metamaterial phenomenon might be contained at the primary site, but its implications extended beyond a single facility. The truth, once partially revealed, continued to unfold in directions that even reformed oversight systems struggled to fully comprehend. The ranger acknowledged the message according to protocol, then stepped onto the observation station porch. The desert night stretched before him, stars brilliantly visible against the darkness. The same landscape he had patrolled for 16 years now carried additional layers of meaning: visible terrain concealing invisible realities, natural beauty overlaying unnatural phenomena, official narratives masking classified truths. Yet his fundamental duty remained unchanged. Whatever secrets the desert still held, whatever anomalies might emerge from the contained phenomenon, his responsibility continued as it had since his first day of service: to observe, to report through proper channels, and to protect both the natural environment and those who inhabited it. 1 year to the day after discovering the abandoned government vehicle, the ranger stood on the observation station porch at dawn, coffee mug in hand, surveying the territory under his protection. The morning ritual had remained consistent throughout his service. These quiet moments before the day's duties began, observing the desert awakening around him. The same golden light illuminated the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the scrubland. The same scent of creosote and sage perfumed the morning air. The same subtle transition occurred as night creatures retreated and day's inhabitants emerged. The desert continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to the human dramas that had unfolded across its surface. Yet within this consistency, transformation had occurred. The bird feeder that had been empty on that fateful morning now hosted a lively gathering of desert thrashers and cactus wrens. The cottontails once again grazed near the station during early hours. The morning birdsong had returned to its normal volume and variety. The ranger himself had changed as well. The horror of his discovery had left its mark, as had the institutional resistance he'd encountered and the classified realities he now carried. His understanding of both natural systems and human institutions had deepened, revealing complexities and contradictions previously unrecognized. He had resumed his duties with renewed purpose, his daily patrols now informed by awareness of what lay beneath the visible landscape. The classified communications occasionally appearing on his secure devices confirmed that the metamaterial phenomenon remained incompletely understood, despite all containment efforts and scientific study. Some questions would likely never receive complete answers, existing at the boundary between established knowledge and fundamental mystery. What remained constant was the ranger's commitment to truth, not an absolute truth that provided complete understanding, but the practical truth of observation, documentation, and proper reporting through legitimate channels. In a world where classified realities could distort official narratives, this commitment represented a necessary counterbalance, an essential function within systems vulnerable to secrecy's corrupting influence. The ranger placed his empty coffee mug on the wooden railing and prepared for the day's patrol. His backpack contained the standard equipment: first aid kit, water reservoir, high-protein snacks, multi-tool, GPS unit, binoculars, field notebook, and digital camera. The familiar weight settled comfortably across his shoulders as he descended the wooden steps to his service vehicle. As he started the engine, the ranger noticed a cluster of ravens circling in the distance, not over the eastern quadrant where he had made his discovery, but toward the north, beyond his jurisdiction. The birds' behavior triggered his professional attention, their circular pattern suggesting something worth investigating below. The ranger checked his secure device for any alerts or communications regarding the area. Finding none, he made a mental note to document the raven's behavior in his patrol log and report it through appropriate channels. After his experience, he understood that observation itself represented the first essential step in addressing any anomaly, whether natural or otherwise. The vehicle handled the uneven terrain with practiced ease as he navigated away from the outpost and onto the network of service roads that crisscrossed the protected area. The familiar landscape extended before him, its visible features potentially concealing unseen realities beneath the surface. Whatever mysteries still remained, whatever truths still awaited discovery, the ranger would continue his fundamental duty to observe with clear eyes, report through proper channels, and protect both the natural world and those who inhabited it. In a reality where crystalline horrors could exist alongside desert beauty, where classified phenomena could distort institutional function, this commitment to truth through proper observation represented not just professional obligation, but moral necessity. The desert kept many secrets, but in 16 years of service, the ranger had learned that even the most carefully buried truths eventually surfaced in this harsh landscape. Whatever still lay hidden, whatever anomalies the circling ravens might indicate, would eventually reveal itself to those patient enough to observe and courageous enough to report what they had seen. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories exploring the thin line between official narratives and buried truths. New episodes released weekly, each uncovering mysteries concealed beneath familiar landscapes.